I refuse to be a puppet because Democrats tend to be of goodwill. We always want to do the right thing. We are always trying to follow the rules and follow the law. Unfortunately, we are living with an administration that does not care. So for instance, we all want to hear from President Clinton. If for some reason you said, we will give you, say, Pam Bondi, and then we've got President Clinton with it, or say maybe President Trump and President Clinton, two presidents, because we know that both presidents actually had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You only care about following the rules so long as you can invoke those rules on what is typically perceived as your political enemies. You only love law enforcement when they're going after black, brown, immigrants, that kind of folk. But on January 6th, you didn't care about law enforcement because they still don't have their plaques up. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have sat here listening and I am quite perplexed. It does take me back to my legal days. And so when I think about a subpoena, one of the things that we normally look at when we are trying to determine whether or not contempt is going to be ushered into the conversation is whether or not there's been substantial compliance and what it means to actually look like you have substantially complied. It means that you're taking reasonable steps to follow a court order, that you're acting in good faith, and typically that serves as a defense. So if we are still crafting the parameters of said subpoena, for instance, my colleague, Mr. Walkinshaw, just asked whether or not this would be limited to the Epstein subject matter. For me, if they responded at all, then there is some sort of compliance, which they did. They didn't just throw the bird. They didn't just say, forget it. But more importantly, I just want to point out that we are living in an age of hypocrisy because my other colleague just pointed out that Mr. Perry sits here and somehow sits in judgment of others. Frankly, that is what people are kind of getting annoyed by, is the hypocrisy, because Mr. Perry still has an outstanding subpoena that was never complied with. In addition to that, he talked about we need to care for the victims. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, and I will yield my time. But I don't believe that Mr. Perry ever signed off on the discharge petition in the first place. So I don't know if he is just doing what he believes is politically expedient, but I will tell you this. I refuse to be a puppet because Democrats tend to be of goodwill. We always want to do the right thing. We are always trying to follow the rules and follow the law. Unfortunately, we are living with an administration that does not care. We just want some type of parity. So for instance, we all want to hear from President Clinton. If for some reason you said, we will give you, say, Pam Bondi, and then we've got President Clinton with it, or say maybe President Trump and President Clinton, two presidents, because we know that both presidents actually had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But what looks political and looks like one can get away with everything, especially since that's what the Supreme Court has stated, that's why it looks like it's just gamesmanship. You only care about following the rules so long as you can invoke those rules on what is typically perceived as your political enemies. This is why we are falling apart in this country. We are supposed to be about checks and balances. It should not matter whether or not you're associated with the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, independent, or whomever, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're middle class, whether you're a black immigrant, or whatever. But it seems like we only have a political agenda in this committee, and that's why everything goes off the rails. You only love law enforcement when they're going after black, brown, immigrants, that kind of folk, right? But on January 6th, you didn't care about law enforcement because they still don't have their plaques up. We continue to do the right thing and say, yes, apply the rules equally across the board, and then y'all play in our faces and you only apply it to one side. I am asking for one commitment, and then I will yield to the ranking member. Mr. Chair, will you commit to me, as the chair of probably the most important committee in this Congress, especially in this moment where people are concerned about the level of corruption that exists within this committee, will you promise me that you are good for doing whatever is right and following the evidence, no matter who is on the other side of that evidence?
Yes, and that is
Okay.
why I subpoenaed the estate. And we had no idea nobody knew. Nobody knew
I
what was in
understand,
the
but-
estate documents. And I, without hesitation, subpoenaed the estate. We've subpoenaed the Department of Justice.
And that's where we got the birthday letter. We subpoenaed
Because
the
of
estate. Hold on,
the
Mr.
subpoena,
Chair.
right.
Okay, we got the birthday letter, but we can't just get the evidence and then not follow up on the evidence that we actually get. I will relinquish the rest of my time to the chair.
Thank you. I just want to just really clarify
I'm in
one.
Riker.
Thank you very much, Representative Crockett. Just to back to Mr. Walkinshaw's point, I think it's important to clarify that in communication, Mr. Chair, with your team and the back and forth with the emails, the Clinton team made it clear that they wanted to answer questions about Epstein, but that was not something that your team agreed to, only about Epstein. And so that's, I just want to make sure to be clarified, and I appreciate you clarifying, Mr. Comer, that you said that you would limit the questions to only Epstein. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I
And
think
what the
that's-
Clinton said that is not true. What their lawyer said is a complete lie.
Well, I'm glad that you clarified for them, because it's been their impression that it's been. I'm just telling you, it's been their impression.
He's paid them too much money then over the last 5
And
months.
sir, I'm just reading emails, and I'm just reading the back and forth between them and your team. It's been their impression that those questions were going to be beyond just Epstein, and so I'm glad that's been clarified. So thank you, Mr. Walkinshaw.
Chair recognizes Mr. McGuire from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you. 5 months is plenty of time. The Clintons are doing everything they can to avoid questioning. And the American people want to hear from the Clintons. You know, Bill Clinton brought Epstein to the White House 17 times. He had him on, and Bill Clinton was on the Epstein airplane 26 times. So the American people want to hear from them. I don't understand why our friends on the left can't understand that. They support these crazy policies like open borders, 20 million people coming to our country. They've been robbing, raping, and killing the American people. You know, Lake and Rowley would still be alive. And instead of protecting law-abiding citizens, they defend the criminals, and they want to have a defund the police movement. It makes no sense. These criminals they put back on the street, recommit the same crime, and they're like, why did they commit the same crime? All Americans have the same goal, the same American dream. We want to live, work, and raise our family in peace. We just might disagree on how to get there, but the Democrats seem to always be wrong. The American people don't want boys undressing in girls' locker rooms, but for some reason, the Democrats support that. 5 months is plenty of time. The American people want to hear from the Clintons, and they said they had no relationship, but they definitely did. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time back to Ms. Luna.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to point out, first of all, specifically to the letter, the hand sketch that was allegedly the president's. I believe there's a $10 billion lawsuit that was filed that, according to the president, the organization that published that is actually trying to currently settle, so just to clarify. But aside from that, I wanted to actually ask Mr. Min a question, if he's here still, if he would be willing to vote for a contempt in the Clintons if they refuse to come in and testify on a fine of about $1,000 a day until they comply with the subpoena. But I don't know if he's here. Is he still here? No. Okay, well, I think that that's just something to consider. You know, we have the ability to do those fines, and I think that that needs to be considered, especially if, you know, optically there is reason for pause for Democrats not wanting to vote for that based on the fact that President Clinton was a former president. I understand the optics of that, and I also understand re-elections. However, nonetheless, the Clintons are defying a subpoena, so sometimes financially, people can be motivated, especially if there's a fine, and that's something that we actually all reserve the right to vote on. And I think that that's actually a very good option, especially being that most Americans would go to jail for defying subpoenas. And so I do not think that there needs to be any special accommodations made, especially given the nature of this, but I do think that that can be a tool to motivate. So I'd like to suggest that to you, Chairman Comer, also to you, Ranking Member Garcia, that would be a good method that we specifically reserve if we choose to use alternative means of contempt.